بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد حبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, we have completed the look at the Bab al-I'rab wal-Bina, and then the restatement of Bab al-I'rab in terms of the various cases, which is ijmal ba'd al-tafsil, right? And that's following the structure of the Ajrumiyya itself. But now we're in a part of the Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya that is an addition by al-Hattab rahimahullah ta'ala. And this is very useful, where after saying, okay, the signs go back to these particular abwab, and now there are a number of aspects related to i'rab that require particular attention. One of these being the mamnu' min as-sarf. So just to recap, what is the mamnu' min as-sarf? Anyone know an Arabic definition of what the mamnu' min as-sarf is? So please speak loud. No, is that an actual definition or a made-up definition? You know, like a definition is almost like the name of somebody, right? Like say, what's his name? Said he is that tall Indo-Pac Canadian guy who lives somewhere around Brampton or Caledon or somewhere like that, right? You can't, like, you know, the definition of something is its identity, and the identity of something is precious, so we need that you can't define something by itself. Al-mamnu' min as-sarf huwa ma la yadkhul alayhi as-sarf. That's saying what is a proper noun. Say a proper noun is a noun that is proper, right? That you can't define something by itself, right? Like you say, what's the ism fa'il? هو الاسم الذي يدل على الفاعل. That's just, you just restated the same thing. Okay. So broadly, there's two types of definitions, right? There's a formal definition and there is a descriptive definition, right? One should know, unless there's an excuse not to know it, one should know the formal definition of something, right? And there's a reason why here, and this is part of being a talib ilm, is why doesn't the author nor the commentator define the mamnu' min as-sarf in this section? Why? It's already been defined before, right? So it's sort of lazy talab al-ilm to just get to this section, and so you ask yourself, al-mamnu' min as-sarf. What, there's the fundamental questions which one should always be asking himself: what, why, how, when, right? Where, and inevitably 3 of the 5 questions are always applicable. What, why, and how always apply. First question is, what is the mamnu' min as-sarf? Can I define it? No. Did the author define it? No. Did the commentator define it? No. Must have been defined before. So one goes back, right? Because that's key. Like one should never be moving forward. Like anything that's come before, if we asked about the section before, what came before this? Right? Al-i'rab al-taqdiri. What is it? Ma walima wa mata wa kayf. Right? These are the fundamental questions. So what is the i'rab al-taqdiri? Well, kind of. That's not ilm, right? That's not ilm. Ilm, and that's why in in the Arabic language, ilm is that which is certain. That's why the Arabs have a whole range of meaning for affirmations. You have dhann, wahm, za'am, right? All kinds of terms. But ilm, even in classical Arabic, and that's why where the scholars of the Islamic sciences take it, that the theologians argue with the fuqaha that what you're doing is not ilm, because it's dhanni, it's not qat'i. They say, yeah, that's according to your standards. But al-ilm is ma yuqta'u bihi. That's even the relationship between ilm and something that's a alam, that's a clear sign, right? It's like a alam is like a flag, it's a tall mountain, right? It's clear and uncontestable. We know clear exactly what it is. That's ilm. Anything else is like, is not ilm. So like, let's take that seriously, right? It's not. That is an explanatory definition, right? So there's things can be defined in many ways, right? So like he gives one definition in the text, like الاسم الذي لا ينصرف ما فيه علتان من علل 9 أو واحدة تقوم مقام علتين, right? That's one. That is a definition, but it is not. But that here, this definition is what they call tawti'atan. It's to prepare, explaining al-mamnu' min as-sarf. Right? This is like sometimes, like if we say, who is Sister Zubaydah? Say, Zubaydah is the one I was telling you wants to marry Zubayr. Is that the identity of Zubaydah? La. I'm giving this definition. This got, the ulama often use the term tawti'atan. It's like preparing for what I want to say next. Right? Who is who is Imam Khalid? You say Imam Khalid's the speaker who's coming to our program on Sunday. Is that the identity of Imam Khalid? No. That's just simply a bridge. One of the reasons being that the person may already know the definition, right? So it's important to pay attention. But this is one definition, but it doesn't full, right? And the al-mamnu' min as-sarf, there's a number of definitions that you can find. One of them is that which does not take tanween, right? That which does not take tanween, right? That's one. And of course, there's a downside to that definition, because that is, what's the problem with that definition? No. It's negating, that's not the biggest problem. They say, وَلَا يَجُوزُ إِدْخَالُ الأحكام في الحدود. Okay? وعندنا من جملة المردود أن تدخل الأحكام في الحدود, or what, however the author of Idah of As-Sulam says. And according to the scholar of logic, one of the things that is rejected is for rulings to be put into, because I want to know what is it, because once I know what it is, then I can give a ruling for it. Yeah. So what's a cow? A cow is brown. I don't know what a cow is yet. Right? Unless, you know. So, al-mamnu' min al-sarf. So I'll leave you thinking about that. And we took this line of poetry. By now you should have memorized it. You know, إجمع وزن عادلا أنث بمعرفة ركب وزد عجمة فالوصف قد كمل. So we took ijma is صيغة منتهى الجموع. Right? It's a maximal plural. Zin, right, is وزن الفعل. And we took the breakdown of وزن الفعل. Right, that there are two types of wazn of fi'l, and they have their conditions. Ijma' wazin adilan, this is al-adl, right? And al-adl as well. How many types of adl are there? There's two types of adl, right? There's actual adl and there's effective adl. And then an-nith bi-ma'rifatin, so this is where we're going to look at. So the purpose of this was just to emphasize that really, you know, we're proceeding forward. Alhamdulillah, that's good. But the matn catches up on you. Any text catches up on you, and then becomes a missed opportunity. That really, we're still in the first quarter of the text, roughly speaking, maybe a little more, but we've taken the heart of the text. That make an urgent plan to write it out, diagram it, review it, like, you know, because that's critical. And that's where, you know, some people ask, like, okay, what else can I read with it? Don't do anything else. يعني قيمة المرء ما يحسنه. A person's worth, as Sayyidina Ali كرم الله وجهه said, a person's worth is what they do with excellence. Right? Right? No one cares about a big resume that I studied 25 texts. Yeah, right? Good. But what have you mastered? Right? That's what matters. And that opportunity is always presenting itself before the seeker. Like, you know, the texts are telling us with the tongue of their states, master me. Okay, Bismillah. So, the author, قال صاحب متممة الأجرمية رحمه الله هو الإمام الجليل الحطاب المالكي رحمه الله تعالى. وأما التأنيث, right? So of the علل of, you know, that of the ممنوع من الصرف, right? He says, يعني فهو على ثلاثة أقسام. It's of three types. تأنيث بالألف, وتأنيث بالتاء, وتأنيث بالمعنى. So there's three types of female, of feminine. Right? And there's several ways of dividing ta'nith. Right? Because one is, you have al-mu'annath al-haqiqi and the mu'annath al-lafzi. Al-mu'annath al-haqiqi is a woman. Right? And you know, and the mu'annath al-lafzi is a word that has one of the female forms. Right? So, the word talha, for example, is mu'annath lafzi, even though it's a male. Right? But let's say some, you know, Central Asian lady's name is Bulbul. Right? or whatever. Someone has a name that's a male name. يعني? Then it may be mu'annath haqiqi. So there's two separate things: the mu'annath haqiqi and the mu'annath lafzi. Here we're looking at the classification of the ta'neeth insofar as relates to al-mamnu' min as-sarf. It's of three types. So he says, فالتأنيث بالألف يمنع الصرف مطلقا. Right? So ta'neeth with the alif always is mamnu' min as-sarf. Right? سواء كانت مقصورة كحبلى ومرضى وذكرى أو ممدودة كصحراء وحمراء وزكرياء. Right? So the ta'neeth bil alif, right? This alif can be maqsura, right? Which is yani without a hamza, or mamduda when there is a hamza at the end of it. In both cases, it yani tamna' min as-sarf. Right? And these are common. So Zakariya, although it's a male name, this form is considered a muannath lafzi. Right? Wa ashya. Now ashya is tricky, and if you're interested, you can read up on it in yani. Right. Al-Faki goes into it a little bit. The author of the Kawakib Durriya talks about it a little more. And if you're really into sarf and stuff, you can there are dictionaries of Qa'id al-Lugha al-Arabiyya, etc. They go into ashya, and there's some discussion on it. And this Sibawayh made a bold claim about ashya, but he won the argument. Ashya, right, is a whole bunch of funny things happen to it. So its pattern, ashya, is laf'a. You think shay, ashya, it's like af'al, but it's not. It's actually like a whole bunch of surfing takes place. Right? For those who are serious about the Arabic language, the sign that you have solid sarf understanding is things like this would be, you already know how that works. Right? Like there's shallow sarf understanding, we just know the patterns. There's slightly deeper understanding of sarf, which you know the patterns, their meanings, and how the patterns work and why the patterns work the way they do, right? How the changes happen, etc. Some contingencies, but there's a lot more to sarf, and it's important for one is to appreciate certain words of the Quran, right? Where do they come from, and so that we can go back to the root and determine the meaning. So Bismillah. Wa ashya. So ashya also is mamnu' min as-sarf, right? وهذه هي العلة الثانية من العلتين اللتين كل واحدة منها تمنع الصرف وحدها. This is the second of the illas that, if found on its own, it prevents sarf. It prevents something taking, tanween, etc. وتقوم مقام علتين. It takes two illas. Right? So this is التأنيث بماذا؟ بالألف. Right? So صيغة منتهى الجموع, and within تأنيث التأنيث بألف. These are the two things that just this on its own prevents صرف. وأما التأنيث, so that was the first type of تأنيث. The second type of تأنيث, أما التأنيث بالتاء فيمنع الصرف مع العلمية. As for تأنيث with a تاء, right? It prevents, it counts as a single عِلَّة. It counts as a single عِلَّة. It needs another عِلَّة with it. The most common case of that is مع العلمية, right? With a formal noun. سواء كان التأنيث علما لمذكر كطلحة أو لمؤنث كفاطمة, right? Whether the word that is in the in a state of who's is مؤنث لفظي is for a male like Talha or for a female like Fatima. And the reason he puts لمذكر first to highlight that it's not uncommon to find male names that are in the female form. And there's many other considerations highlighted by al-Fakihi, but you can look over. In any of the various cases, because the word can be thulathi or ruba'i, it could be foreign, etc. Right? وأما التأنيث المعنوي, so تأنيث بالألف, تأنيث بالتاء, and the تأنيث المعنوي, right? Right? And the تأنيث المعنوي is defined by al-Faki وهو كون الاسم موضوعا لمؤنث خاليا من علامات التأنيث. Right? So the تأنيث المعنوي is a word that was placed for a female but does not have the lafzi indicators of تأنيث. It has neither an alif or a ta. Right? فهو كالتأنيث بالتاء. It is like the تأنيث with the تاء that it يمنع الصرف مع العلمية. Right? It prevents صرف with علمية if it's a definite name. فيمنع مع العلمية but with conditions. Right? With conditions. لكن بشرط أن يكون زائدا على 3 أحرف. On condition that it be beyond 3 أحرف. And there's khilaf on this, and it comes up in hadith. So is the word hind, for example, ممنوع من الصرف or not? Say هذه hindun or hindu. Okay? But he takes a position here, right? لكن بشرط أن يكون زائدا على 3 أحرف, on condition that the تأنيث أن يكون أي التأنيث المعنوي زائدا على 3 أحرف. It'd be more than 3 letters. أو ثلاثيا محرك الوسط كسقر, or ثلاثي whose mid letter has a حركة on it. Right? أو ساكن الوسط عجميا. Right? Or you could have a sukun in the mid letter, but it's foreign, like كجور. Right? Right? Which is a name on but then, of course, if it's ajami, then is the illah there Is it that it is ta'neeth or is it ujma? That's a separate discussion, right? But because in general, Arabs considered foreign words to be heavy, thaqil, so they didn't. So they didn't do. They didn't. It's from their usage. And it's almost like an identifier for a foreign word as well. That they didn't make ta'neeth of it. أو, so there's multiple cases, right? أو منقولا من المذكر إلى المؤنث, or it is transferred from a male to a female. كما إذا سميت امرأة بزيد. So if you named a woman Zayd, right? So if someone said marartu bi Zayda, what are you indicating about Zayd? Sorry, no mumbling, please. Yeah, that Zayd is a woman, right? منقولا من المذكر, and there's a number of names that Arabs frequently use for both male and female. And like other peoples, there's a range of names that Arabs use for male and female, and others. Because Zayd has a meaning of ziyada, of increase, right? And it's a meaning that they also ascribe to their daughters, but it's certainly not common, right? فإن لم يكن شيء من ذلك كهند ودعد, right? So if none of these three reasons, right, exist, what are the three reasons? Right? That it's زائد على ثلاثة أحرف. If it's زائد على ثلاثة أحرف يمنع من الصرف. محرك الوسط يمنع, like سقر, for example, right? Or ساكن الوسط and أعجمي. In these three cases, so the مؤنث المعنوي يمنع من الصرف بشروط, right? Which are that it be one of three cases. So what if it doesn't have one of these? So where are we now? The مؤنث المعنوي that does not fulfill these conditions. So it's ثلاثي ساكن الوسط غير أعجمي, right? And not منقول. Number 4, منقول من المذكر إلى المؤنث, right? كهند ودعد, right? جاز الصرف وتركه. There you can engage in صرف or not engage in صرف, meaning you can treat it as ممنوع من الصرف. مررت بهند or مررت بهند, بهند with a fatha, right? And وهو الأحسن, and this is better, and there's extensive argument about this, right, as to what is the proper usage. Right? That's why he says هو الأحسن, pointing to there being extensive disagreement. How? No, because Muntah al-Jumu'ah is a plural. Su'ad is one name of one person. Muntah al-Jumu'ah is like Masajid, Masabih. What does that have to do with Su'ad? No, but Muntah al-Jumu'ah is the maximum plural in a form. the mu'annath al-ma'nawi is a female. They're two different creatures. The ta'nith al-ma'nawi can be with the ta, the alif, or it can be ma'nawi. Okay, sorry, the mu'annath, the mu'annath can be بالتاء بالالif بالتاء. So بالالif, this is considered علة تقوم مقام علتين. بالتاء يمنع مع العلمية. And المؤنث المعنوي, it's tricky. And the مؤنث المعنوي works when there's a resemblance to المؤنث بالتاء. Right? Either it be more than 3 letters, so the fourth letter is akin to the ta, the ta marbuta, right? Or there's a haraka in the wasat, so then it's as if it has a fourth part to it, right? Or it's sakinul wasat ajami. Why? Because then it's a foreign word, and al-Ajrumiyya مع العالمية تمنع من الصرف anyways. منقول من المذكر إلى المؤنث, because then it has a resemblance there to being ajami. Or to adl. There's 2 reasons given for it. So it resembles the adl. So if none of these exist, and there's a number of names like this, the most, and Hind because it comes up in hadith, right? So there's of course is Hind a foreign name? And right, that's a separate, that was also a different discussion, but Hind would appear to be an Arab name. So Hind has a bunch of issues with it, but إن لم يكن شيء من ذلك هند ودعت جاز الصرف. You can use تنوين on it. مررت بهند وجاز تركه. Right? وترك ماذا؟ الصرف. أي جاز منع الصرف، وهو أي ترك الصرف أحسن. And this is عند الجمهور, right? But it's extensive difference because, and because the comment, just to point out one of the major grammarians on the other side, Abu Ali al-Farisi, he says والصرف عند أبي علي. Abi Ali here is Abi Ali al-Farisi, who died 377 after the Hijrah, and he's a significant right. So this is the summary, right, on it. That in لم يكن شيء من ذلك, so the مؤنث, so the مؤنث المعنوي, right? And these really, before, the right way to come to class is this should be diagram before, so one can conceptualize it very clearly, right? The ta'nith is of 3 types. What's the ruling of al-mu'annath? التأنيث بالألف. So let's not mumble. يمنع الصرف, but it's هذه العلة الثانية التي تقوم مقام علتين. التأنيث بالألف. There's تأنيث بالألف يمنع من الصرف. Someone's name is there's an old man, they called him Fata. What's the ruling? Sorry, that's entrapment. Okay. So the muannath al-ma'nawi, al-muannath bil alif, that was entrapment just to see if you would fall for it. Fata on its own, just the word fata is in mamnu' min as-sarf? No. Yes, it's the i'rab taqdiri. Right? The i'rab taqdiri. So the alif, right, whether it's maqsura or mamduda, so like Zakariya, the ta تمنع مع al-Ajrumiyya, right, whether it's a male name or a female name. التأنيث المعنوي, how many cases are there of the تأنيث المعنوي? Okay, which are? Okay, in Arabic. زائدا على ثلاثة أحرف. Okay. أو ثلاثيا محرك الوسط. Or ساكن الوسط أعجميا. Or منقولا من المذكر إلى المؤنث. These four cases, all of them are ممنوع من الصرف. And then there's a fifth case, which is there's اختلاف on, number one, right? Which is it's مؤنث معنوي, but none of these four things apply to it. So it's not زائدا على ثلاثة أحرف, it's ثلاثي. It's not محرك الوسط, it's ساكن الوسط. It's not أعجمي, it's غير أعجمي, and it's not مذكر الأصل. So none of these four apply to it, like, and he gives two examples, Hind and Da'ad. And this is where the larger commentaries are useful to look at. Okay, what are other examples? The Kawakib would give other examples. So there, جاز الصرف. You say, مررت بهند, there's nothing wrong with it. وترك الصرف وهو الأحسن, that is superior, according to most of the later scholars. Right? But this is one of the things that, why? Because اختلفوا في استعمال العرب. They differed in the usage of the Arabs. And one of the tricky things is, it frequently comes up in poetry, but sometimes some of the usages, you could say, is this because of ضرورة الشعر, because of the end of a line, etc. There's kalam on it. Practically, you have leave. You can do both. منع من الصرف is better. Go ahead.
How can we know if the alif maqsura at the end of the word is for ta'nith or not? Like for example, here we have example as marda. Like how do you know this belongs to them?
Where's the example?
Sorry, so when we read at وأما التأنيث فهو على ثلاثة أقسام, and then he says فالتأنيث بالألف يمنع الصرف مطلقا سواء كانت مقصورة كحبلى ومرضى وذكرى.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. What are the criteria for consider? So basically, what's the difference between that and like fata? Good. The basic answer is that the alif al maqsura, the alif there is zaida, right? So fata, the alif is from it's from the root of the word itself, right? Fata, for example, as opposed to hubla, the the root is يعني حبل حب and lam. Same with marda, dhikra, etc. Right? Or sakra, for example. Right? The root is sa, ki, ra. Right? So that's the basic difference. There may be other criteria, but that's the very basic difference.
So we need to know the self.
Yeah. Right? Because the alif is za'idah, right? The zawaid are summarized in one word, right? Which is سألتمونيها. And these are things that are appended in the beginning or end of letters. يجمعها قولك سألتمونيها. Right? Okay. So Hind is one of those fascinating things, and there's a lot of argument about it. But many of these things, practically, if something does not relate to understanding the core of a text, it's good to put something al-khilaf fil this, and there's discussion here. And you say, okay, like you could do both. It's something. Someday you're bored and feeling particularly nerdy. It's something you can go read up on, right? But that's one of the ways. Like there's strategic distraction. Strategic distraction is for one's distraction to fulfill, secondary purposes that one has. So Muhammad al-Hasan, for example, he used to keep a number of books next to him, but purposefully. So when he got tired of what he was doing at the time, he would look in some of those books till he'd, get back his, intellectual vigor, and then get back to what he was working on, presumably fiqh, right? But rather than just randomly opening different things, so one is just that's distraction that causes one to drift. So part of focus is we cater for the fact that we'll get distracted and we'll get lazy, right? But they say one of the signs of guidance is man kana, whoever's futur is to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That when one has nothing better to do, one still does something good, right? And it's good to plan that out, right? To keep a few extra. I actually try to keep some extra books with me normally today, So I'm not teaching it at all, but just in case I have some extra time, I kept an extra book with me. So if I get bored of you guys, I'll open it and look at some hadith in Targhib wa Tarheeb, for example. Okay, Bismillah. So that's the ta'neeth, right? And these are very useful zawaid, right? Because he's summarizing a whole thing that seems very daunting, and it has nuances. It has nuances. And part of the benefit of covering things like this in a matan format is that he summarized a whole lengthy discussion for you, right? And this is very useful because if we don't get this at this stage, then getting to something like Sharh Qatr al-Nada and then Sharh Shuzur al-Dhahab, one's still trying to figure out, we come to a case of ta'neeth. You're trying to figure out, okay, what is this? Then you're missing out on the real purpose of the intermediate texts. The purpose of the intermediate text is now to really understand how why is the man' min as-sarf this way? Understand examples of it, applications of it, and to go into the real richness of grammar in its how it works and its implications. So really, please give it its due. Jazakallah khair. Amma ta'rif. And the feminine is tricky. the feminine is tricky, right? That this of the ilal, this has quite a bit of nuance. But these are the kinds of things someone would ask about, right? Like saying that the ajami is mamnu' min as-sarf, that's not fiqh al-nahu, right? That's not understanding of nahu. That's just common knowledge, right? You pick someone off the street and say, they won't say marartu bi Mikailin, right? Of the streets of Damascus, for example, maybe some parts of the Arab world they speak a different language, right? Okay. Amma ta'rif, right? Right? What's meant by ta'rif here? Ijma' wazin adilan annith bima'rifatin. So what's meant by ma'rifa here? التعريف فالمراد به العلمية, right? العلمية, right? Right? For something to be a personal name, the personal name of something. وتمنع الصرف مع العدل. So the alamiya has several cases in which it يمنع من الصرف. And this is quite common because we name things. So تمنع الصرف مع وزن الفعل, with the وزن الفعل, like كأحمد ويزيد مررت بيزيد, right? ومع العدل عمر زفر, right? etc. ومع التأنيث, right? Right? كما تقدم. And then he adds a nuance, right? Which is ومع التركيب المزجي, right? And what is an example of التركيب المزجي? He'll mention it in a second, right? التركيب المزجي is two words that started off as two words. They came together to form one word, and that one word became لازم, right? So it's مركب في أصله, right? But امتزج and becomes one word. Like even in writing it, you write it together. And he'll give a number of examples, right? ومع الألف والنون. This is an example of that is عثمان, right? ومع الألف والنون. Okay? عثمان. And these are sort of added on. Why? Because Uthman is alam. If you go through the other things, is it wasn't fi'l? No. Is it adl? No, it's actually almost like reverse of adl. It's not feminine. And you see the other things. So how is it mamnu' min as-sarf? Because we say, okay, under alamiya, this is almost like a micro illa, right? مع الألف والنون ومع العجمة كما سيأتي. And with with a word that is foreign, as we'll see, like Mikail, for example, right? Or Mikal, right? وأما التركيب فالمراد به so that is the علمية. العلمية تمنع من الصرف, right? In these particular cases that he's listed. وأما التركيب ركب وزد عجمة. So أما التركيب فالمراد به التركيب المزجي, right? And you could number these علل. ركب وزد عجمة, right? التركيب المزجي المراد به التركيب المزجي المختوم بغير ويه كبعلبك. Right? It's a name of a town in Lebanon. Right? مركب من بعل وهو اسمه صنم وبك. Right? And they differed what bek is. Bek refers to either an honorific or اسم صاحب هذه البلدة. Right? And then ثم جعل اسما واحدا. Right? And this is ركب is a تركيب المسجي. Of course, there's a number of such names in Arabic. So Ba'al on its own, because a tarkib al-masji, like other types of tarkib, when something comes together, the new word indicates a meaning. So Ba'alabak is the name of a town. Right? So it does not indicate the meanings of its two components. Now, if we have a choice, right? So, should we call a town Ba'labak? No, like why not choose a nicer name than the name of an idol, right? But it's already the name of the place. And the ulama said that the قاعدة استصحاب الحال, which is الأصل بقاء ما كان على ما عليه كان. It's one of the consideration. It's one of the governing principles of fiqh. The basis is that things remain as they are. That's part of قواعد اليسر يعني ودفع الحرج. Is there a governing reason? And say okay. And if you analyze it, it's like one of the great scholars of Damascus of the 20th century. And for a while, I had his own copy of al-Jawhar al-Nayyira with the Lubab in the margins, with notes from him, but I gave it to a friend of mine. And I was going to disrespect it. You know how my library is. Shaykh Abdul Wahhab, Dibs wa Zayt. Right? Now, Dibs, you know what Dibs is? Dibs is like grape paste. So behind Sharia Baghdad, there's a mahal not far from Jamia Tawbah, which was their I think that's where it was, at least one of their family's shop. They used to say that a mahal, that a place that they sold dips and they sold zayt and other things secondarily. Dips was this great paste. It was very, actually, and they're famous for that. So actually, that's not his actual name. Some people didn't like calling him that. They think his actual family name is Al-Hafiz. It's Abdul Wahhab Al-Hafiz, whatever. Al-Ma'ruf or Al-Mashhur bi Dibs wa Zayt. Some books with his forewords write his name like that. But everyone knows him as Shaykh Abdul Wahhab Dibs wa Zayt. Right? Now, it does not indicate that he sells dips and zayt. Right? It's now murakkab. It does not indicate it's two parts anymore. So, for example, if you live in Christchurch and you become the mayor of Christchurch in New Zealand, do you have to change the name of Christchurch? No. It does not mean that this city is dedicated to Christ and a church dedicated to him. It's a name, and we have to realize, and that's just a broader thing, but there's many names, and this is just an example because I've been asked more than once when I was at university and several times since, that if I go to University of Toronto, is it allowed for me to enroll at Trinity College? Yeah. Because the college, do you have anything to do? Does the college have anything directly right now primarily to do with the Trinity? No. Now, if you're going to choose names for a college that you're starting in partnership with others, you'd navigate around giving such a name, but it's already there. Right? Is its dilala right now primarily or directly towards that ma'na that's mamnu'? No. There's no issue in it. And in India, a lot of cities and towns and places have, you know, names of Hindu idols. Companies. Can you work for, Shiva Ramakrishnan Institute for Agricultural Technology? Yeah. Right? That's your common name. You've got 3 idol names in one. Shiva, Rama, Krishna, all in one. Right? You can. Right? There was an Indian cricket bowler whose first name was Lakshman. So his name was Lakshman, Shiva, Rama, Krishna. Like 4 idol names in 2 words. Because there's a three in one. Right? If I mention someone's name, I'm not committing shirk. Like, I'm not calling upon those idols. I'm just mentioning someone's name. So anyways, so this of course addresses many other ahkam. So for example, some people ask, Nike is the name of the Greek idol of something or the other. Can you use that name? Bacchus. Someone's actually asked me, is Shaykh Zahir's name halal? Because Bacchus is the Greek idol, the Greek deity for wine and revelry or something like that. But that's not what his name now indicates, right? So, and these are examples. Okay. Kaba'labak. And literally there are hundreds of ulama. Because, Lebanon is part of Bilad al-Sham. And there are a lot of ulama from Ba'labak. Many. Just a quick search in the the biographies of the ulama. There's literally hundreds of people of ulama come up whose last name was Ba'labak. Anyways, Wahadramawt, right? Which is a region in Yemen. It's originally murakkab from 2 words, hadara and maut, right? Because of how barren, at one level barren, and the other at how daunting, because there's steep mountains and so on, that it was if you get there you're gonna die, right? But right, so at Tarkib al-Masjid, so that's these are 2 examples. The commentator mentions that the Tarkib al-Masjid excludes at-Tarkib al-Idafi, like Abdullah, because they remain 2 words. One word is Tarkib al-Idafi is 1 word is ascribed to another, but it remains 2 words that have been put together. The masjid, the 2 words become 1. That's the difference. Right? And there's also a tarkib called Tarkib Isnadi. Right? But we don't need to worry about that right now. And he excluded بغير وجه, right? Because wayh, right? This is one of the Ajami forms, like Sibawayhi and Naftawayhi and Ahmadawayhi, and there's a bunch of these names from Persian. It's Tarkib Masjid of 2 words, but the Wayhi pattern is Mabni al al-Kasr, as we took with Sibawayh. The only time that changes is when would Sibawayh not be Murakkab, would not be Mabni? Sorry? Yeah, so what happens to it? Guys, we gotta review it. When there's Tanween al Tankir, 4 types of tanween. What are the 4 types of tanween? Okay, so there's tanween al-tamkeen. There's the regular default tamkeen. Zaydun, Amrun, Tankir. This is it. The others you can. And what are the other 2? Iwad and Muqabala. Right? عوض يعني اللهم اغفر لنا المسلمين والمسلمات يا رب. So the tarkib, right, which is a tarkib al-masji al-makhtum بغير وجه, because مكان التركيب المسجي المختوم بوجه like سيبويه is مبني, right? Right? And there's اختلاف about that too, right? But, right? He says وخرج بقيد الأخير ما ختم بوجه كسيبويه فإنه مبني على الأشهر, right? But this is, it's mabni. Like, you don't have to worry, just be aware that you may hear other things, right? Of course, one of the things people sometimes think that, for example, in some lands, the mashayikh are like just very explicit. They'll be just straight up in your face. So, what do you know? Like in Sham, you think they're being really nice with you, but they're roasting you. Like, they'll mention something. Say, let's read this. And they'll bring something like this up, and they'll see. Because someone said they studied the Mutammima, but like this comes up in the Sharh. Do you know the Sharh? Because if you don't know that, that there's ikhtilaf on ما ختم بوجه, that what's mentioned here is the ashhar, that's the widespread opinion, but there's a minority opinion to the contrary. And those minority opinions, the one who knows them is less confused. Because why? Because then if you don't realize something like this, and then you're looking up something in a larger text, and that author, especially the earlier authors, the khilaf narrowed down as disputes got more and more resolved. Right? You see something, you're like, oh my God, what just happened? Like, it'll shake you up, but you see, okay, this is an opinion, but there's khilaf al-ashhar. So you know that. But that's all after taking care of just the basics, right? Bismillah. ولا يمنع التركيب المسجي الصرف إلا مع العلمية. The تركيب المسجي only works with العلمية to make منع من الصرف. So when it's a definite name, right? And there's a number of these. وأما الألف والنون الزائدتان, that's the, like عثمان, فيمنعان الصرف مع العلمية كعمران وعثمان كعمران right? كعمران وعثمان ومع الصفة, right? بشرط بشرط ألا تقبل التاء, right? It's a real problem when you have like editors who don't know Arabic. Okay. مع الصفة بشرط ألا يقبل التاء, right? كسكران, right? So sakran is a sifa. رجل سكران, right? And we'll see the definition of sifa. So we'll just keep it brief on that, right? That doesn't take, you can't say sakrana, right? وعطشان, right? And we'll see the sifa in a moment. So this sigha of alif and noon الزائدتان Because Imran, the alif and noon are additional to the root of the word. Uthman, likewise, right? And therefore they and then amma al-ujma, right? The word being foreign, right? فالمراد بها أن تكون الكلمة من الأوضاع العجمية. For the word to be originally, in its origin, from foreign forms. But when a word like that is incorporated into Arabic, right? The word is now mu'rab, right? It's considered Arabic. And the reason that's important is there's a number of ways Orientalists and others, and this is an old argument, like the Christian Arabs try to make this argument, right? And it's been dismissed ages ago, like 1,200 years ago, the argument was dismissed, right? 1,300 years, at least, yeah, probably 1,300 years. So it's not a new argument, right? And that the Quran says بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ, but it's got a whole number of words that are not Arabic. So how is it Arabic? And every word that's in the Quran is Arabic. How? In that these are all words, either Arabiyyun asalatan, or it's entered it had already entered the Arabic language at the time of revelation. There's a number of these words, qindil, etc. There's a whole bunch of words that are, but they entered the Arabic language to become Arabized, right? Just like now, mosque is, but for example, Hajj is an English word. You can find it in the dictionary. It's just entered the English language. So you type Hajj, if you write Hajj, you don't italicize it. Why? Because it's now an English word. It says entered the English language, and it's known to the one addressed. So it's mubin. It's clear. معناه معلوم. Right? أما العجمة فالمراد بها أن تكون الكلمة من الأوضاع العجمية, right? From non-Arabs, right? Whichever language it may be from. كإبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق ويعقوب. What do you have in your text? Is Yaqub part of the text? وإسحاق. And then? There's a well? Yeah. There's a wa missing in most copies, right? وَجَمِيعُ أَسْمَاءِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ, and all the names of the prophets. They're all أعجمي. وَجَمِيعُ أَسْمَاءِ الْأَنْبِيَاء أَعْجَمِيَّةٌ إِلَّا أَرْبَعَةٌ. Right? This is a very useful fa'idah. They ask about things like this. Which are محمد وصالح وشعيب وهود صلى الله تعالى عليهم وسلم أجمعين. Right, so there's 25 names of prophets that are mentioned in the Quran. All of them are A'jami except for 4. Right? Because they're Arabi. Right? Now, there's two things, but then there's a trick. Right? That's where the students stumble because they don't pay attention. Because if you've looked at the principles before, right? It says the commentator says وَأُلْحِقَ بِهَا فِي الصَّرْفِ نُوحٌ وَلُوطٌ لِخِفَّتِهِمَا. Can you think of an example in the Quran of this? امرأة نوح وامرأة لوط. They come together, right? In mention, right? And but it's khafif. Right? The reason that broadly that the default for Ajami words is that mamnu' min as-sarf is that their pronunciation has naw'u thiqal. But these Nuh, Ruh, right? There's many. This is a form that's directly so, and it's just 3 letters, right? So there's no thiqal in it. Right? So Adam, so and then he adds, that Adam is included in this, right? Because there's some discussion about Adam is also Ajami, right? Though there's some taraddud about Adam. Is it Ajami or Arabi? Right? And some of these things are subtle. This is why it's good to appreciate that they're subtleties. Right? So, right? So, Zamakhshari, between the Kashaf and his own work, Al-Mufassal, he differed as to whether it's Ajami or Arabi. One of the arguments that Adam is Arabic is that yusaghar. You can say uwaydim. And you can only do tasghir of Arabic words. Right? But for the Ajami word to be mani' min as-sarf, he says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ فِيهَا, right? For the ujma to be mani' min as-sarf, one of 2 things, أمران. أن يكون الاسم علما في العجمية, that the name be a definite name in the foreign language, right? ولذلك صرف لجام ونحوه, right? And that's why lijam and other words like it are munsarif, even though their root is non-Arab, right? Right? Because it wasn't a alam in non-Arabic, right? It wasn't a name for a person or a place, right? I don't know what language Lijam is from, but it's not originally Arabic. Interestingly, of course, some of these differences in understanding of these kinds of things, of words and their usages, that's one of the ways differences appear amongst the qira'at, amongst multiple differences. So that is one, right? That it be alaman fil ajamiyya, right? والثاني أن يكون زائدا على الثلاث, that the Ajami word be more than 3. لذلك صرف نوح ولوط. That's why both Nuh and Lut are منصرف. Because it's خفة, right? Though of course, there's like most of these things, there are discussions. أما الصفة, right? Right? And by صفة here we mean الصفة المعتبرة في منع الصرف. What do we mean by صفة when we're talking about الممنوع من الصرف? Right? فتمنع الصرف مع العدل كما تقدم في مثنى وثلاث ومع الألف والنون بشرط أن تكون صفة على وزن فعلان بفتح الفاء وأن لا تكون مؤنثة على وزن فعلانا. Right? So the صفة تمنع من الصرف in one of three cases. Number one, with عدل, like مثنى. What's the root of مثنى? It's اثنين اثنين, you say مثنى. ثلاث معدول عن ثلاثة ثلاثة. مع الألف والنون, that it be a صفة على وزن فعلان, and it does not take the feminine in proper Arabic. Because يعني right? Because, and that's one of the things that people get up, like sakran, for example. You don't say sakrana. غضبان, you wouldn't say غضبانة. You want to say هي امرأة غضبة, for example, right? But you don't say غضبانة. What? What? No, but that's with a tanween. What? غضبانة, meaning with a التأنيث. That's غضبانا أسفة, right? غضبانة أسفة. There's no, sorry, غضبانة, it's ممنوع من الصرف, but there's no تأنيث there. It's not غضبانة. We're talking about it's على وزن فعلانة, that takes a تاء مربوطة at the end, like a تاء. So it's, from فعلان, is there a feminine form of it? فعلانة. So that's one صفة. مع الألف والنون أن لا يعني ولا يكون مؤنثة على وزن فعلانة. And then what do you have? ونحو سكران. So that's another example, right? سكران is غير منصرف. Why? فإن مؤنثه سكرا ونحن ندمان منصرف. Then what do you have? In the text? What do you have in the text itself? Okay. What? Yeah, I have some omission here, right? So another example, right? مع الألف والنون, right? So let's go back. أما الصفة تمنع من الصرف في ثلاثة. مع العدل, and we took the examples. مع الألف والنون, but the ألف والنون يعني it's على وزن فعلان, and its female is not فعلانة. So an example is sakran, because its female is sakra. And like nadman, if it's from yani nadmana, يعني ونحو ندمان منصرف لأن مؤنثته ندمانة من المنادمة. Right? Right? Because nadman can refer to two things. One is munadama, or from the meaning of nadam, of nadim, then it's غير منصرف. And you can look up the two usage of. So nadman, okay, and so the munadama is when two people come together to share their sorrow. And very often lovers would come together to share their sorrow. Right? So nadman, if it's from munadama, that there's then it's munsarif. If it's from munadama. If nadman is بمعنى النادم هو ندمان. Right? Because munadama is there's two people who are both sad together. Right? So then it's munsarif. If we're just describing one person from nadim, has the meaning of nadim, huwa, nadman, then it's غير munsarif. Right? Because, and this imagery is used a lot in spiritual poetry, because the default state of lovers is loss, and loss results in sadness, and sadness leads to drinking, and drinking leads to, and drunkards are found in the tavern. And who else is found in the tavern? Other drunkards. So each is sad and they console each other. Yeah? Okay? Okay? So as يا ساقي الندمان من رائق الدنان أدر علينا الكاس فإنني ندمان. شربت ترياقي من راحة الساقي فاني أنا باقي, etc., 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 right? So it's used, but in the nadman, right? It's from munadama, that when people are together sharing their sorrow, that's munadama, right? And it doesn't have to have anything to do with alcohol, whatever, but that's sort of the classical state. The Arabs in Jahiliyyah used to get drunk, and that imagery was used by poets largely metaphorically. Now, one thing that because a lot of wine is involved, love is a big theme of poetry, is that just be careful. And I got a bedtime telling off, not telling off, correction by Shaykh Mu'min about this. A lot of the poets use the imagery of the Jahili poets. Right? Even the shu'ara of the Sahaba did it. Right? Sometimes real imagery, like in the case of Ka'b ibn Zuhair, where it says, Banat Su'adu, there is an actual Su'ad in his life who turned away. Right? And did we make the lesson live with Shaykh Mu'min's lesson? Okay. So, he gave the context to Banat Su'ad. It's amazing. But sometimes, they come up with imagery. But the point that imagery is just khayal. It's just khayal. Right? Right? It's like, and so many poets use this kind of playful imagery to make a point. right? It's like, and Abu Nawas has many examples. Some people said Abu Nawas was corrupt, and this is dhulm, right? This is dhulm, and you have to be very careful. And basically, any criticism, يعني الجرح لا يقبل إلا من عدل. A critique of another is only accepted by someone trustworthy, because the basis is كل المسلم على المسلم حرام. So a lot of these udaba and so on, they say all kinds of wacky things. And what's your basis for it? والله قرأناها في شعره. That, right? That's like saying Tolkien lived in Middle Earth. No, he didn't. He lived in England. He wrote about Middle Earth. Doesn't mean that, it's imagination, right? It's like, Abu Nawas has the lines of poetry. I can share them. That she gave me a kiss unexpectedly, filling my life with joy. So I asked her, would you gift me with another? She said, the way of children, said one must be careful with children, because if you give them once, they become spoiled and ask for more and more. There's no woman and there's no kiss. That's all just a khayal that is a means to making a point of wisdom. That be careful with children, because if you give them once, you can spoil them and they want more and more. Right? So to say that he was in an affair with some random lady, that's dhulm. Anyways. And some of these cases, of course, are a little more on the rare side, right? ومع وزن الفعل, so the صفة تمنع مع العدل ومع الألف والنون, unless it takes the feminine فعلانة, ومع وزن الفعل بشرط أن تكون على وزن أفعل. So the صفة تمنع من الصرف with وزن الفعل if it is على وزن أفعل, وأن لا تكون ولا يكون مؤنثه بالتاء. نحو أحمر. Right? Why? لأن so أحمر is a صفة. It's على وزن الفعل. But what's the شرط? لأن مؤنثه حمراء. It's not أحمرة with a تاء. ونحو أرمل. أرمل is a صفة. Right? It is على وزن فعل. أرمل أفعل. أفعل is one of the أوزان of the فعل. But it's منصرف. Why? لأن مؤنثه أرملة. الساعي على الأرملة واليتيم. Right? In the hadith, right? The one who strives to take care of the أرملة, the widow, and the yatim, the orphan, yani, will be with me, like these two in paradise. Right? Ma'ika hatain fil jannah. Of course, Imam Ahmad said if someone raises two fingers for things like this, he said chop their fingers off. But we didn't mean it literally. He says because there's a danger, because it makes it seem as if the Prophet ﷺ says that, and he put his fingers together. But we don't have a description of how he put his fingers together, so you don't narrate it putting your fingers together. Because then it makes it look as if it's from the hadith that are musalsala, right? Where the hadith is narrated in text plus mode. Right? Text plus the mode of transmission. And then he did this. right? Of course, the musalsalat, most of them are weak. Number one, right? Some people like there things that relate to barakah. Barakah is vitiated by boasting. Someone said, "Oh, zurna Shaykh Fulan," and we got ijaza from him in the hadith al-musalsal bil-musafaha, in the hadith al-musalsal bi-lubs al-imama, in the hadith al-musalsal bi-kada. What's the point of mentioning all that, right? These are danger. We have to be really on guard, right? We have to be really on guard. Of course, you cannot think ill of someone because that's wronging them. One needs to be careful. Things like that, one benefits from things like that when the context is correct, but one has to be very, very careful. لأن مؤنثه أرملة, right? وكأحمر, right? And then what do you have? Okay. And he says, then he puts a proviso, right? Right? Because the Arabs were ultimately practical, right? So what did they say? وَيَجُوزُ صَرْفُ غَيْرِ الْمُنصَرِفِ, that it is permitted to make sarf of that which is غير منصرف للتناسب, when there's munasaba between it and things that are munsarif, when they come together, right? Right? Because, as the commentator says, فإن رعاية المناسبة في الكلمات أمر مهم عندهم, because the Arabs considered keeping in mind the suitability of words when they come together important. It has a rhetorical impact. There's some things that, like for example, in Old English, for the purpose of poetry, sometimes like a word like over, if you put over, it would break the meter, so they'd omit the V. They say or, right? For the purpose of, and these are from the norms of the Arabs, right? And these are things that they had already in their language. Right? In their language. Right? كقراءة نافع. What does your copy say, Omar? سلاسلا بالتنوين لمصاحبة أغلالا وسعيرا. Right? So in the قراءة of نافع, سلاسلا وأغلالا وسعيرا. Right? But the qira'ah of Hafs is سلاسل وأغلالا وسعيرا. But this is from the usage of the Arabs, that there's a number of things and it flows. So we will say it's ممنوع من الصرف, right? وصرف للمناسبة. Right? It's ممنوع من الصرف in itself, وصرف للمناسبة, but we gave it sarf for munasabah. And so sometimes these are things, and these were from the usages of the Arabs, right? Right? And of course, these are very useful to know, because you don't know when you'll run into a Christian polemicist. In Jordan, literally, they used to sit especially in cafes. Like you could tell, a single man, a single American or European looking person just sitting on their own, appearing not to do much in a cafe, they're going to be a missionary. Okay? So I actually have a friend who's a white American convert. So then he says, okay, let me check this out. So he goes and says, you American? And you could tell Americans from Europeans from a distance. So yeah. He says, man, these locals are crazy. Right? And start talking. And he used to be in the U.S. Marines, etc. Start talking. And without his hat on, he's bald-headed, so he looked like some rough, loud American. They're talking, so what do you do here? And he said, yeah, I'm here on doing some missionary work. Yeah. It would always catch it, right? And the sad thing is there'd be a lot of female missionaries, the way you'd identify female missionaries, like I have a Halabi friend who's always like one of the best dressed guys. He just go and he just go up. We just said an experiment. Said, good afternoon, are you American? He says, yes. He says, yes, I was wondering, is the coffee here good? And we did the experiment a couple of times. And the lady would start flirting with him. And he said, yeah, I'm, and invariably bring up something about Islam. And he said, you say something weird. And they're missionaries. And there are a lot of young people who get affected by that. Sometimes people wonder, why are people getting so upset with missionary work, etc., in these countries? There's a lot of really vile things being done, like a lot of dishonesty. Okay? People cheating others and so on. Anyways, but it's important to know that it's not a grammatical error. This is from the usage of the Arabs. Now here he just mentions examples in the Quran, but if you look in the in even the intermediate level works of grammar, you'll see multiple examples of this from the Shawahid al-Shi'riyya. And sometimes you wonder, why do people mention the Shawahid al-Shi'riyya? Because things like this, someone says, well, this is error grammar. Someone who knows grammar would be able to say, la. In the pre-Islamic period, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this. This is all example of صرف غير المنصرف للمناسبة. It's found in the Quran, and it was from the usage of the Arabs, and he mentions one example لضرورة الشعر. So أغلال وسعيد, then what do you have? What do you have? Do you have قوارير? Yeah, قوارير. What does your text say? Yeah. Okay. قواريرا قواريرا. Right, from Surah Al-Insan. It ends one verse, begins the other. So the qira'ah of Nafi' is with tanween. قواريرا. Right? ولضرورة الشعر. So the ممنوع من الصرف قد يصرف أولا للمناسبة, ثانيا لضرورة الشعر. Right? Where the shi'r wouldn't fit otherwise. And does he mention the poem there? I used to have a theory, but then it got confirmed, because I worked for a while with book publishers, that at this point in my copy, the editor probably went and made qahwa. And he was busy drinking his qahwa while editing the manuscript, because the last 2 pages, like the copy was pretty decent, but he forgets to open and close brackets for pages now. So what does it say next? And then? Does he mention the example? Not in the matan. Okay, good. Okay. يوم دخلت الخضرة حذر عنيزة. عنيزة. And this is from the, of course, the you have عنيزة, right? Right? Normally it would be حذر عنيزة. But if you say حذر عنيزة, it would break the wazn. So it's لضرورة الوزن. Right? حذر عنيزة. فقالت, لك الويلات إنك مرجلي ويوم دخل sorry it says ويوم دخلت الخضرة حضر عنيزة, right? And the rest of it فقالت لك الويلات إنك مرجلي. Okay? So the Khidr, the day I entered the Khidr, the private room, الخضرة خضرة عنيزة. I entered the private room of Unayza. Right? So and the rest of the line is فقالت لك الويلات إنك مرجلي. Right? But she was there. Right? And this, because it breaks because there's a number of darurat al-sha'r is that so that fits the meter of the sha'r. And elsewhere they discuss, when they discuss poetry, like what there is ما يجوز لضرورة الشعر. There's things that are permitted and there's nothing wrong with it. There's things that are better to avoid, and then there's things that can be done, but it is considered like mustaqbah, right? It's considered improper, right? So there's a degree of things on what you can do and not do in poetry, but it's very, very common, right? Even, for example, the Arabs, instead of saying ya sahibi, they used to say sahi. It doesn't mean wake up. It means sahi is what? No, but in poetry, it means sahibi. Right? So, for example, Shaykh Abdurrahman Shawi in his poem said, "Sahi faghnam al-ma'asha kam maytin atahu ma'asha hasha an yakhiba hasha man ata bi sidq an-niyya." Okay? Sahi, it's ya sahibi. It's murakham. Right? There's some things that are allowed in poetry, and they're different. Those causes, they give them different names, right? But that's outside the scope here. So this is the section. So today we looked at the section on al-man' min as-sarf. There are many nuances to it. Things like this don't stick just by intuition. Right? It requires, there's no way around taking notes, diagramming, practicing, review, test one another. You have to do what it takes to retain it. Otherwise, irtahala min haythu ja. It'll go from where it came. Right? Right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for retention. And then he says, النكرة والمعرفة. Right? The nakira and the ma'rifah. And these are a number of chapters which he listed first in summary. These are exceptions to the general, they're exceptional considerations to the rules of i'rab related to them. And one of these now is babun nakira wal ma'rifah. Right? And he defines nakira and he defines ma'rifah. There's probably nothing more tricky. There's a few things in grammar. So we'll strive to do nakira and ma'rifah and dhamir next week at least. And the dhamir is very straightforward, right? It's long, but it's or at least to get into the dhamir, right? A lot of the chapters are very, very straightforward, but some are tricky. So, inshallah, let's take some opportunity to catch up. And I am promising بإذن ta'ala that we were going to have a test because we're going to take a little bit of a break like in time for RAS. So we're inshallah going to have like a comprehensive series of comprehensive tests as a vacational present inshallah. تفضل.
Just for the تشكيل of the examples, we gave كقراءة نافع سلاسل and then قوارير قوارير.
So both, yeah. So qira of Nafi' is salasilan with a tanween. بالتنوين in لمصاحبة أغلالا وسعيرا. So what does it say in the matan? Because he gave up on brackets over here.
For me it says كقراءة نافع سلاسل.
That's it.
And then قوارير.
Yeah. Right? Because there it's because of munasaba of أغلالا وسعيرا سلاسلا وأغلالا وسعيرا. Right? So the qira of Hafs, which most of you, what you'd be familiar with, is سلاسل وأغلالا وسعيرا. But Nafi' read it سلاسلا. That's from the usage of the Arabs, right? قوارير, he read قواريرا بمناسبة ما قبله. And the second قوارير, he also did tanween of it, out of musahaba of the previous qawarir. So, and you can, yeah, so both have tanween, yeah. Yeah.
And also Shaykh, I want